Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Fireside Chat. This is Fireside Chat number 36. And if you haven't seen us before, basically a conversation among friends. We pick a topic before a few minutes, and yeah, we just share our thoughts. If you're following us live on stream, remember to comment. If you haven't, you know, hit the notification button so you can get this alerts when we go live. And without further ado, let's introduce the topic for today. And the topic for today is how do you start projects well? And the reason that we're discussing this is that we're a consultancy, right? So we see a lot of projects start and end as well, no? And I think people undervalue the basically the power of starting your project well, right? Like, it's really hard to recover from starting wrong, but if you start well, it's easier to have bumps along the way, and you still be able to maintain, right? At least that's my impression. I don't know, guys. Well, what do you think?
Max,
Well,
you go.
yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's very important that there are a number of things to get right. There is no point in stumbling over those things, right? So the way I see it is we call these project inceptions. By the way, if you worked with us, gonna hear project inception quite a lot, especially when we start, because from our point of view, we want to maximize the chances of success. And we know that there are a few things that need to be in place from the very start. And it helps a lot if they are in place, because otherwise you waste a lot of time. Uh, you you end up making certain mistakes that you can potentially avoid. So the way I see it is that there's quite a few things. It's not just about planning. It's also about team formation. It's about product strategy. It's about technical strategy, technical approach, all these things. And it might seem like a lot of upfront design and upfront planning, and the old adage, the plan doesn't survive the first contact and all that thing. And I think, you know of course there's an element of that, but depending on the detail. But there are a few things that you should get right. Otherwise you are going to uh, going to have problems that that you should not have had if you had planned well or started well.
Yeah, and I would second that, because it's not so much the planning. Is there are certain things that are very well known that if they're not there, things will go wrong, right? The things around clarity of the context, alignment of how we're going to do things, like all of these things are part of that start, no? And they're
Yeah.
not necessarily related to planning ahead or anything like that. It's more like, hey, how are we going to do this? No, how are we going to tackle this challenge together and make sure that we don't stray, and so on. So and one thing that surprises me is that not everyone is this conscious about starting a project. And I think most developers, unless they work in a context like, for instance, ours, no, or in an agency or in a marketing agency, something like that, where you're constantly seeing lots of projects coming in, coming out, it's really hard to get that learning or enough learning so that you can intuitively know when things are not going to go well, just by looking at how things are going. What do you think, Sandra? Because
So this is what I would like to say, because like a lot of people that are might be watching these first few minutes might be thinking, oh, but like this is just specific for a consultancy because you guys are always starting projects and stuff. But I work for a product company and we are working on the same product or the same area of the product for a long time. So we'll never start a project, or this is not relevant to us. And I would completely disagree, because it's important to say here is that starting a project doesn't mean that you are starting it from scratch. Anyone in any context can continuously start projects, right? So even if you are in the same stream of a product, because what is important here is to say, look, we are going to start a new piece of work, and instead of just carry on as you've been doing, maybe that's a good time to say, hey, let's stop for a period of time here, maybe a few days, a few weeks. Let's look at this new piece of work. And you can treat that as a new start. So even in a continuous product, in a continuous stream, you can have multiple starts. And I think that everything we can discuss in here, as Mesh mentioned, a project Inception, is not just for greenfield, starting from scratch projects. But maybe what we could do here is to say, what do we do in these when we start a project? And again, within the context of anyone listening could start a project tomorrow if they wanted to. They could say, let's have a break of what we are doing and let's start again and plan our next, 3 months, next quarter, or 6 months. So anyone can do that at any time. So what do we do to make sure that things go well? So maybe we could explain what an inception is, or even a difference between inception and discovery is as well, because some people
we can go into that, like, for sure. This Inception thing, at least for me, the first time that I heard about this, at least with that name, was in the Agile Samurai book. I don't know if you heard of it. And he was introducing the Inception deck, which was a set of 10 exercises that he regularly used to precisely launch projects or start projects, so to speak. But if I go to, before we go into any of that, if I go into the root of the thing, or the meat of the thing, for me it's about 3 areas, right? One is purpose. Why are we doing this thing, whatever it is? The other one is context. So what is around, like what will we have to deal with? And the other one is alignment, right? Like, so okay, now that we know those 2 things, what we want to achieve and what the context is, like, how are we going to get there? And clarifying that, making that explicit to everyone, and sort of setting everything up so that you have the best chance of succeeding at achieving that goal, right? For me, that's the basis of everything. All of the other stuff is just, how do we make that happen, right? Like all of these exercises that he talks about. And again, I'm a bit of a, I tend to mix and match things depending on what the situation requires. But it's not, again, it's hard for me to say one specific thing that I always do on this, right? Because I look at it from this different lenses, so to speak, or these different angles when we're starting.
And this makes sense to do different, because we can go into the details of some of the things to look at. But like, if you think about depend of if you are starting or restarting a project, right? So because like I even changed the title, by the way. I put how do we start or restart projects well. So because like the one question that comes up is, say, okay, we might do some planning up front as we are starting a project. Like, say that is the beginning of the project. How far do we go with that, or how far that initial inception, let's say, can take us? I think this is a question that Mesh was asking earlier. And so, and then when do we know that it's time to do that again? So if we stay that at more high level, then we can go deep into what to do in those situations.
I quite like the 3 things that Jose pointed out: purpose, context, and alignment. And you can answer this question in those ways as well. When you are starting a greenfield project, right, your purpose might encompass the whole project or even a product. You've actually been tasked with creating a brand new product, and maybe you're a company in your own right and you're starting, or so the purpose aspect could be the purpose of your, at that moment, could be the purpose of your whole product, could be the purpose of a particular release. I mean, every new release, you should have some kind of inception, whatever lightweight inception you need to have. You need to have. So you can actually create like the scope according to your horizons. You may even need to do both. You need to do if you're just starting out, you may need to look at the purpose as a whole, but purpose for the next MVP, the first MVP, right? So you also, what would that be? But also, if you are starting off and you're a brand new team, part of your inception may be around team agreements. It may be around roles and responsibilities of within the team, who does what, who's responsible for, who's accountable for what kind of roles exist, what is expected, what does the rest of the team expect from those things. And I think all those things, to me they are around, there's alignment aspect to them. You're kind of trying to align, because you are the at the highest level. What it is, the reason you're doing all this is that you're not one person, you are a team, right? And often when you start talking about like how Jose was saying, oh, it's surprising how many people don't consciously do it, because often in product companies or larger organization, what happens is the project gets given to one tech lead or a couple of people who start the project, and they kind of do an inception in their own heads, but it's just them. And suddenly they start adding more people, and they've not had this purpose or the context setting or the alignment at all, right? So you kind of go into the execution phase without even aligning or creating setting a good context.
You easily can go into that situation where everyone thinks that they know what the project is about, but everyone is thinking a different a different objective or a different goal that they have in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, each person creates their own context in their head, right? And they just keep rolling like that, but those contexts are not fully aligned. But for example, who should be involved? Because like we mentioned, like quite a few different things that we look at, right? So this purpose thing that you mentioned, or this alignment, and those things, like they are at different levels as well, because like you can be talking about a small set of features, or you might be thinking like, where do we start from? So who should be involved, and also where does the definition of the team or redefinition of the team fits into this process? Because quite often we don't also change the shape of the team either, right? So what do you guys think?
Well, who should be aligned is an easier one. It's a whole team, right? So it's basically everyone involved in the execution, so the development team, but also the stakeholders, right? They need to be, and the users, and XP talks about the whole team, and there's a lot of material on what exactly the whole team is, right? So that they should be, it should not be just the developers doing this, because then they can align with themselves, but may not align with the other roles within the team or the stakeholders that they have. So it's a time it's not just about aligning the team, but also the touching points of the team, right? So which are, in the concept of the whole team, they are considered part of the team. So what was your second question, Sandro?
The second question was about when do we define or redefine the team?
Oh, when
the development team, because like again, the way, just to clarify also, because we the three of us, we have a lot of context in our heads, right? And we might be looking at different examples in our heads. So just for people listening to this, so there is a much wider team, and that involves everyone, as you said, Mesh. Like it might involve the business, or whoever is marketing, sales, whoever is the business side that gives the requirement. There is the sponsor that provides the money, or sometimes it's the same person, sometimes are different departments. We might have multiple stakeholders. A product might be very small and with a single stream, or can have multiple streams and might be quite large, and almost like every area of the product can be a different department. And so there is a lot of complexity in this wider team. And there are also development teams that can be one, or can be a collection of them as well, right? So for the purpose
of what we're saying, because by the way, on the chat there's also some contributions there, and one of the things that someone is mentioning, Muhammad is mentioning, is that in the current industry that we're living in, people are joining and going all the time. So really that team that we're talking about is not something that is static, that you just at the beginning you set it up and that's it, and it's going to stay like that. That would be ideal, most likely, because you all of the learning stays, right? But the reality is that you're constantly changing and having to deal with a context that is not as you expected it, right? So having this in places, or having, let's say, let's call it enough documentation, yeah, to be able to onboard someone quickly, and to be able to get them up to speed and pointing in the right direction, no, is quite important nowadays, right? It doesn't matter if you're doing agile or you're doing something else. And whoever says that, no, what we need to do is start coding, right? um they don't understand that this is also necessary in order to be successful, right? Which is another thing that came up in the chat as well,
But
right? Like,
one thing is, I wouldn't talk about an inception when someone, a new person joins, or someone leaves or is replaced, or so
No,
on, right? Because
no.
there, what you have is, if the team agreements, the purpose, the alignment, all that is there within the team, what then you would have is that person would come in and they will assimilate, because you know there is that kind of learning by osmosis. There's like, the teams kind of bringing this person in, onboarding, getting them going, and all that kind of thing. So you don't need a project inception. That is an onboarding of a new team member, right?
Mhm.
The project inception, at the very least, should happen at the key milestones,
I
and
I, I
starting.
agree. Yeah, yeah, I agree. I wasn't referring to having to do it every time someone joins, but the byproduct of having done that definitely makes it easier for someone to be able to join
To
and or
get
leave
on
the
board.
team and so on. Yeah. So
Mhm.
if you didn't do that, chances are that it's not only at the start, it's after that, when people join and go and so on, you're going to have issues as well. If you
Yeah.
did that well, that process will be a lot easier, because you have codified, so to speak, the direction in which you need the project to go, what are the constraints, like all of these things that are quite important. You have them available and in an easy to digest format, so to speak.
Yeah.
No, and that's what I meant, because we were talking about team, not that the joining of a new team member would trigger
Yeah.
that. It's more like if it's there already, that process is a lot easier.
So let's kind of, I mean, a lot of people would be wondering, right? What is an inception? So what do we actually do in a project inception? So let's take the example of a
Mhm.
project starting from the very beginning. Let's say that it's, you know, let's say that in a lot of cases, what happens is a product already exists, a new project has started. Let's start from there, because that is probably one of the most common things. The
Mhm.
new project is started. They've assembled a team, um, which wasn't all working together. Maybe some people may have been working together, but there's new members, and it's a brand new project, right? So what do we like when people, because this is what often happens to us. So what are the things to get right in that particular scenario?
All right. If you ask me, I would go for those 10 exercises, not necessarily all of them, but let's say have a structure of going from more abstract to more concrete. Yeah, starting with why, no, like why are we doing this project, no, like what is it that we're trying to achieve, like what are the number one goals or targets that we're going for. And I think that's super important. If people don't know that, then chances are they're going to make up what the goals are on their own, and they're going
Yeah.
to be going in different directions. So
And how do we
start.
know that we've succeeded?
Exactly. So that will give you not only the direction, but also, hey, are we there yet? No. So that's one aspect, and then from there you can start going down. Right. In the case of the Inception net, there's 10 exercises. I don't remember all of them, but you have an elevator pitch, and the purpose of the elevator pitch is that you're able to explain this to other people within the organization, stakeholders, customers, etc., so that you have articulated what the vision for this thing that you're building is, right, and you're able to explain it easily. Then it also uses I think it was the the product box, right? Which is another exercise where you kind of find out what the key features of the product are. What is important out of this project, no, or out of this product. Then you go into things like meet your neighbors, right? Like who are the people that are going to be working with you, no, and what are the relationships that you have with them, dependencies, on and so forth, responsibilities, yeah. You also have what keeps us up at night, which is risk management, right? Like, what is it that can go wrong on this thing? You have the not list, which is kind of like an initial scope, and defining what is in or out of the project. No, is it gonna have AI and blah blah blah? Is it gonna have no, or we don't know? We need to find out. We will have to review. So again, what you're doing is you're going from more abstract, like the idea of what this should get, like what problem it solves, etc., into okay, some features, and then how are we gonna get there, blah, blah, and architecture. You're probably talking about architecture. You're probably going to be talking about the size of the thing. How many months are we going to be building this? Like what the size of the team is. So all of those things you're kind of making it a bit more concrete as you need them, right? So, but that's like the template. No, that's like the blueprint. A lot of the times you may not have time to do all of that. You may not have all the people that you need to do that, or you may have them in separate conversations, no, because they're not available all at the same time. So you really need to understand what you're trying to achieve in order to tailor the approach to your situation.
There is an element around the team as well, right? Is that if you've got a new team, you need to work on team agreements. You need to work on roles and responsibilities. Where does the accountability lie? Who's doing what? Especially at the role level, not at the people level necessarily, but definitely at the role level, right?
Yeah. So what I would say is, you mentioned, Jose, like we might not have the time to do all of that, and that is true, because like you what we don't want to do is to say, hey, we have this list of exercises or things that we need to investigate, and we're gonna do a checkbox. We're gonna go one by one. You need to tailor that list according to your context. Like as we were discussing, if you're starting from scratch, there is far more things that we need to look at in order to increase the chances of having a successful project moving forward. So we might need to look at more things. But if you are already in a stable product and you are now just bringing a new set of features to life, so that is, you need to look at far less things. Then you don't need to review everything. So 10 years of history of that product, you might need just to look at a much smaller subset. But I think that it's still important to say that the timing, because regardless of how much stuff the team would like to look at, there will always be a question, we don't have time. And I think that this is, we need to put into perspective or into context. If you are planning to take on a set of features, and there will be a development team involved, and this team will be working probably for a few months on something, we need to understand that maybe stopping before we start typing on the keyboard for a week in a thing that we all think that might take 6 months to do or 3 months to do or whatever, it's a good investment. What we are not saying is, oh, let's plan for 6 months and then, no, we're saying like, let's plan for a week. Maybe do some workshops, maybe try to analyze those risks, do some proof of concept in the unknown areas, and invest a small period of time so that we can start in a better foot. And another thing that I would like to add is, how often do we do that? Because like I had projects that I had 2 different criteria. One is the more natural criteria that I find, that is the scope of work. And I can give a few examples just for people listening to have the same context. For example, one of our teams, the context was very clear. The client has a deadline for a regulatory thing, so the product had to be adapted to be compliant to our regulation, and that had already an external deadline. So the whole scope of the project was related to that. So the phase, let's say, was about that scope of work. We also had other teams that say, hey, we have this, for example, they want to bring almost like a separate product. They already have a product and they want to build a separate, almost like a sibling product to life. So again, the way that we are dividing those phases or those inceptions is grouping functionalities. Oh, let's group this amount of functionalities in here, and let's go for 3 months. And then we do another inception and go for the next group of functionality. And then, so as soon as we finish that group of functionality, we do another inception for the next group of functionality. So that is the more natural way of doing things. But there are projects where there is not a natural cut of functionalities or set of features. It's just a very long process of modernizing something, or you still can break it down, but the breaking down is a bit more artificial. So then I like timing. I say, you know what, if you don't have a clear cut in terms of functionalities or features, let's break 3 months. So then we are going to do per time. So what can we achieve in 3 months? And then we have an inception for a quarter.
You can, even in that, you can actually argue, why don't you? Because in those, there's at the very least every kind of work, unless you're doing all sorts of things, and then you got a different problem, right? Because you're not focused. But if there's focus, then there is every sprint or every release.
I can give you a few examples just to clarify. So, for example, one stream of work was a modernization for the user interface, right? But the application has more than 1,000 screens. And there was upgrading versions of frameworks, and they had to do cluster of screens. So changing that was very painful. And it will be at least a 1.5 year long project. So, for example,
that's why I said you'd have bigger problems.
Yeah. So, but you can still cluster. We say, look, for the first quarter, we're going to focus on modernizing the libraries. For the next quarter, we're going to take this set of screens and we're going to work on that kind of problem, and so on. You can still cluster, but we do per time, because there's no natural cut. It's not that there was like this set of epics, or it's just the same continuous work. But then we say, what could fit in 3 months? We work almost the other way around. Instead of saying, hey, there is this set of stories or epics, let's have a phase until we are done with the MVP for those things. That might be 3 months, might be 6. Right.
One thing that is interesting is that if you, because the project that you mentioned, and I think the ones we've been discussing so far, it's sort of clear that there's a deliverable, and that's the outcome, no, that you're looking for in many cases, right? Like that's, we need to build this thing, or we need to modernize this thing, right? But if you're, let's say, in a startup, or if you're doing real product development, as in you don't know what it is that you're building yet, you're not copying something else, right? Like you are kind of discovering what that needs to look like, then it's not as simple, because you're looking for an outcome. Yeah. But if you have that clear and you phrase it as let's say, as an experiment, you can still do that batching that you're talking about, right? So you don't know exactly what exactly you can exactly you can say, okay, so we're going to improve this thing, right? Like, and this is the hypothesis that we have, and work from there, and then that sort of defines the scope, no, that you what is it that we're going to be building, no, or what size those things will have, no, in order to understand the investment that you're making. But it is something that is applicable whether you are building or modernizing or innovating
or innovate. Exactly. Yeah. You can always, if you try hard enough, to come up with something that actually provides you with the focus. Because in fact, when we start in with the and whether that focus is 1 month or 3 months or 6 months, depending on the complexity of what you're doing, but it's important to have some kind of a focus, right? So I mean, we're kind of veering into like, how do you define milestones on a particular project or product, right?
In a way, but it's also about how to start projects well, because like if you treat each milestone as a small project, because this is, I think that's, if you go back to the beginning of our the conversation where Jose mentioned, a lot of companies are not used to start projects because they start a project and they go on that same project for years, right? And what we are challenging here is that they could be starting projects every 3 months, even if they were in the same product and stuff. And that would be the milestones that we are talking about. And the milestones can be either by time or by group of features, or normally a combination of both. So there is just one thing, Mesh. There are a lot of things that Muhammad and a few others, Nikita and a few others mentioned, that are very interesting for us to address. I'll take the first one. Muhammad mentioned that a lot of people say that doing those things is not agile, and I heard that comment as well, Muhammad. But in fact, for me, this is what makes agile. Because bear with me now. So imagine that you start a project and you do this planning once, and then you go for 3-4 years without doing that, just one iteration at a time. You don't know where you are, because like the focus that Mesh was saying, the focus is way too small. The focus, when you have just an iteration focus, it's difficult for us to step back and say, but are we still going the right direction? Are we achieving what we set out to achieve after 6 months or after 3 months? Or so a lot of companies, they have two focus. One is a 5-year idea. Oh, in 5 years we would like to do X or to be X. And they have a very tiny focus, almost a myopic focus, that is the iteration focus. That is a 2-week focus. What is missing here is somewhere in between. It's like a 3 months focus, a 6 months focus. So like, okay, we want to be in this place in 5 years' time, but we cannot just look at 2 weeks. It's too small. So we need to say, what can we achieve in 3 months? And this is what we are saying here. So, and for me, this is agile. This provides a business agility, but it needs to calibrate the unit of time that should be bigger.
Mm-hmm. You know, you again, the thing is that this relates to many other areas of product development as well. So again, because we're talking about road mapping, we're talking about having a product vision, we're talking about, experiments, like all of these things are kind of part of that. I don't know if I got caught there because I froze for a minute. I don't know.
No, you're fine.
No, yeah, we heard you.
Yeah. Okay. So it's quite important not to see it in isolation, right? Like, it's not, this is the beginning of the project and that's it, and then we create a backlog and then we build features, and then when that backlog runs out, then because it's something that is happening at all of these layers at the same time. It's also it's iterating as well. It may not have the same cadence, right? Like the 2-week thing that we're talking about, no? And it may be bigger, or it may take a bit more time, but it needs to be happening and it needs to be updating constantly as well, no? Yeah.
So there are no,
go on. Like, I was just going to read the questions. Go for it.
There is something mentioned about make sure there is a team, not a group of individuals. So there is a team spirit that needs to be created, of course, in order to any project to start well.
But this is part of that, and this is part of that. Like, providing the purpose is as well part of making that team, right? Like, what is it that this team? What is the purpose of this team?
Yeah, so this is maybe a good point that we might expand a little bit, that Nikita mentioned, right? So make sure that there is a team and not a group of individual contributors. So how do we achieve that during those inceptions and stuff? This purpose, let's say, purpose is right. So how is it, like, involving everyone? So explaining, because there are many people need to be involved, right? How do we create a team?
I kind of hinted at that, no? Because again, these are all happening at the same time. You're aligning people, you're providing the purpose, and you're giving the context and all of that, right? So I think it's not the same when it's starting than if you're joining a project that is already on flight. or in flight. Back to our conversation, right? So I think having that conversation of where this needs to go and what the purpose is, even if you were not part of defining that purpose, it helps you connect to what it is that we're trying to achieve, right? And in another thing that helps with that is the clarity on how you contribute to that person. So that part of that alignment as well. We talked about responsibilities. We talked about meet your neighbors, all of that stuff. So that is part of that. Sorry, that is part of that. Now, like, what is it that you're trying to accomplish, and how do I, as an individual contributor, contribute to achieving that purpose? So that is quite important. So this interdependency that you're showing is, I think, what helps gel that team. So you have a common objective, which would be this purpose, this thing that you're trying to build, etc., right? And you have interdependence. So everyone needs to contribute in order for us to succeed. It can't happen that I reached the goal but you didn't reach the goal. That's not a team, right? So you have this interdependence, you have a common objective, and this is what you're doing in the Inception. Yeah, you're giving that common objective, you're showing the interdependence, you're clarifying roles and so on. So
Yeah, there is another thing that Mesh mentioned as well. That is clarifying roles and responsibilities is important, because this might sound a bit unpopular, but like projects in private companies, it's not a democracy. It's like, one thing is to have everyone aligned. Another thing is thinking that everyone can contribute to every decision, and that is not true, right? So the direction of the project, what needs to be done in which order. Some people have the decision power, some people can influence, and some people will not even influence, right? So, and this is true for different types of decisions within the project. That should at least be true. So there is spheres of influence that people have, and the spheres of influence, they are not necessarily hierarchical, but I'll give you an example. So if you are deciding what the team should be doing, so what is the goal of that project? This is not for the team members to define in most of the organizations. There will be a few exceptions where a very small company where all the individuals share the same stake in the responsibilities and in the company, that might be the case. But like, in terms of the direction and stuff, this is decided by the sponsor, by the business people, the people that are paying for the project, that want that done. But then there are how certain things will be achieved, and or in the order that things might be done. Some people on the technical side might have a lot of inputs, and they can influence that decision given their technical expertise. And the reason that I say that this is not hierarchical, at least should not be hierarchical, is, for example, when you get to the actual details of implementation, when we do the technical design or the architecture or the low-level technical design and the testing strategies and the coding itself, then those people that made the decision of the direction of the project, they have no influence in there. So the developers should have a lot of autonomy to decide technically how things should be done. And other people outside the technical team should not have the same saying on the things. This is why I said that it's not hierarchical. There are spheres of influence. But in order for this to work well, as Mesh said, and you hinted at it as well, Jose, this is part of the agreement, the initial agreements, or the agreement that is continuously reviewed every time we do planning and such. Okay, what are the roles and responsibilities, right? So who should be consulted? Who should be making those decisions? Who is accountable for what? That conversation
should be informed. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, there are a few other questions actually. Mohammed Sufyan asked one which was related to, is this also relevant irrespective of any size of the company or at any level? And I would say yes, because as we said, we mentioned a lot of things, but Inception is about the things that you need to get right before you move forward. So if you are, let's say, you're going from one milestone to the next milestone, one of the most basic things that you do need to get right is like understanding the success criteria for the next milestone, understanding the technical approach that you may take, how big an effort you think it is, the kind of things that Jose was talking about. What are the risks involved in that approach that we are taking? Or again, going back to the who's your neighbors, are there any new dependencies that we need to? So you pick and choose the things that are relevant at any different point. And I think there is a related point is that, he said, that this is just a consultancy thing, right? So these are consult things. We don't need that. When Mohammed said, like, if he's pitching these things and they say, well, these are consultancy things, well, that's not a good argument, like, that we shouldn't do it, right? I mean, the argument should be on the value of each exercise that you're doing as part of the Inception, right? The reason that we do these things is that it is actually arguably more important for us to get the projects right and get the make sure that they are successful, because the client is less forgiving of an external consultancy than they are of their own people.
Yeah.
Right. So with us, there is always, in terms of what value we are spending this and what value are you providing. So it is really important. So we don't do things so that we can sound clever and all those things. We do those things because actually there's a lot at stake for ourselves to making that project a success. Right?
Exactly.
And for us, they are super important.
Exactly. So this is not just, we are consultants, we make stuff up and just to charge more. No, in fact, this is essential for us to provide the value, because otherwise the person paying is to say, look, I don't know which value you are providing. I'm just saying, just see that I spend a lot of money, but I don't know what I get in return. So bye-bye. I don't need you anymore.
Yeah.
So, and this should be done by everyone. As Mesh said, I agree 100%. It doesn't matter the size of the company, but as long as there is an investment on building something, the people building that thing should be on top of the planning of the return on investment, the costs, what should be done by when, what we are trying to achieve, have we achieved, yes or not, yes or no, if no, what we're going to do instead, if yes, what's next. So it's at the end of the day, this is a business, right? So regardless of your employment status, let's say. There was another thing that Muhammad mentioned, but I think we touched on that. He said, I'm pitching these ideas to my friends, and one of the common arguments that I always get is these are consultants. Yeah. So there was...
There is actually one I would like to, I think it was by Kema. The key is to constantly iterate to update the focus. And I think there is a subtlety in that. So yeah. So one is that you need to have a focus in the first place to update the focus, right? So and that's what we are talking about initially. We're talking about Inception at whatever point that you make it, to create a focus, right? Because focus has or needs to change significantly, and that's one of the points that you may say, okay, we're gonna take stock and we're gonna see what is needed for us to now move into that direction. But then there is the constantly iterating to update the focus. Right now, this is a funny one, because depends on the impact each iteration has. Right. So like theoretically, yes, I think in Agile, at the end of each, you deliver a feature, or for kind of, you complete one lead time, let's say, you move one thing from left to right and you kind of get feedback and you work on that feedback. But often this is not what happens. Normally what happens is that you've kind of divided things. There's a bunch of features, and them together have a business objective that you are trying to understand. So that's why I'm trying to address that, is that there is subtlety in what iteration allows you to feedback or to update your focus, because you can't always change your focus at each iteration. And in fact, if you do it too often, then it's no longer focused, right? So you kind of move from one thing to another. It's chaos.
It's
so
just
you need
chaos.
to have ideas bed down and be gather feedback, understand it, and feed that into the next kind of effort, right?
This is one of those things that organizations that try to adopt agile or practices, let's call them, right, struggle with sometimes, because you're constantly changing, but then you're not delivering anything. Like the outcome that I was expecting, or the thing that I was pursuing on the business side, that never gets done. There's always something else, right? There's always this thing that needs to done, and this other thing, like you're running after the next shiny thing. If you're doing that, then you're not, if you look long term, midterm, you're not delivering the value, right? So, and having this approach where you're balancing both things out is something that we have to do a lot, right? Because we again, we are charging for to deliver a service, but when you're working in an organization, a lot of times people are not even aware of, right? They then see that they're not delivering anything, right, or they're not accomplishing what they strive for, but the teams are busy, right? Like we're putting features out, and we're it's not like people are stopped, right? But we're constantly moving
Well,
around without a clear direction
sorry.
that you want to go into.
Funny you should say that, because a while back one of our clients said, and is that, oh, we don't want to do agile anymore, because last time we did that, we put something in front of that person, the clients. They had their own client, and we put something in front of them, and they say, oh yeah, we like it, but we want this button changed, and this thing changed, and this thing changed. And suddenly it's all about these little changes they want to make, and the next big thing in the backlog is waiting there. And we were saying, and they said, oh, that's why we don't want to do agile. We want big releases, and we want to throw it at them and get lots of feedback. and I think the observation was valid, of course, but the conclusion was the wrong one, because in fact it was exactly this, that they were failing to articulate a focus for a particular milestone. And because they didn't have these particular milestones, that they didn't have, like, this is the impact that this milestone is meant to deliver, and so on, what happened was that when you went in front of the users or stakeholders, they looked at the details, they looked at the nitty-gritty, rather than what is this meant to be achieving and what is meant to be coming next, so that we can then really decide what to do next, or what to feed back into the next milestone. So they were just constantly adding more scope, let's say, to the existing thing. So again, it is a symptom of not having a good, well articulated focus, right?
Yeah, and another symptom that we find, I believe that most people can relate to, is we have a lot of people working very hard, but then we have the business people, the sponsors, the stakeholders, always complaining that things don't get done fast enough, and the development team saying, look, we are working like crazy, and they don't appreciate what we are doing, right? So they are always changing their mind, and they never appreciate what we do. So this conflict between business and technology is always there. And this is a symptom. This is a symptom that, like, what is missing? Alignment. So, but this is what I said, cannot be on the 2-week iteration. It needs to be a little bit longer, because the business their time span is a bit longer. They say, yeah, you can every 2 weeks say, oh, I've done this bit now, I put this button there, I have now this new screen. But for them, they want that batch of features that needs to go out. So calibrating that. So Petros mentioned here. So the debate question everyone has to answer for themselves is what is the most meaningful iteration time based on their context. Yes, exactly. So, but there is, on top of that, is the alignment. Because, for example, for the stakeholders in your context, if you are talking about a set of features, let's say a group of epics or whatever, say, okay, that's what they are interested. That's like, when this thing, I don't care what you do every 2 iterations, you do those small demos. It's great, the small demos, we should have them, because then we know progress. We can discuss if we are going the wrong track, and then we can recalibrate. But ultimately, what they care about is when that whole thing is adding value to the business. And quite often, organizations don't have that, don't have these 3 months, whatever that period might be in your context, Petrus. But I normally, if I had to give, without knowing the context, if I had to give a guideline, I like 3 months. So with no context at all, I think that every quarter, 3 months worth of work to batch a group of features and say, did we provide all those things together? Are we providing meaningful business value? I think there's a good time. But then I would recalibrate. I would be very itchy. I would not like to have a phase, let's say, or a project, if you like, that goes for beyond 5 months. Even if it's the group of features are large enough and you take longer than that, I would advise, okay, can we break that down? Because then you can align with the business. Then you say, look, this is where we are. We are showing these every 2 weeks or whatever iteration demo that we do. But this is what we are trying to achieve. So we are here, but this is the whole for the 3 months. And you can keep updating them. And this is a more healthy way of working with the business and discussing progress. So, anyone want to add anything?
There is another thing. I'm trying to remember the name. I was just Googling it because it is well known that when you're going through, say, when a team is focusing on a task, there are certain points in time where you are able to influence the way that the team is working, right? And it's usually beginning, middle, and end, right? So people start and they will, just we need to get stuff done. Okay, so they'll start, right? And then after a while working, usually around the middle, they say, "Oh, this is not working. No, we need to change something, or we need to adapt," right? And then at the end again, right? Like when you're closing, you're like looking back and you're seeing, right? So if you consider your iteration size a year, right? That basically is the first month, no, the 6 month and the 12 month kind of places, no, where you have that feedback, right? If you split it into smaller chunks, just like what you do, with some agile methodologies like Scrum, etc. No, and you have your iteration like 2 weeks, whatever, 1 week, no, and you're trying to incorporate that learning into the size of the thing. So it is a trade-off that you need to find, but it needs to be something that allows you to learn enough during the time that you're spending on the project. Like if you go too narrow or too small, there is a lot of overhead that you're having to incur for that learning, and maybe it's a bit of a law of diminishing returns, right? Like you're not getting as much learning as you think you're getting, but you're paying a high price for it, right? If you go the other way, no, you may get a lot of learning and pay a little
But it
bit,
might
but
be
you
quite
get
stale.
exactly old, right? Like it's not
Yeah.
going to be useful at that point,
And
right?
there's too much learning, so too many things to address. So you kind of start losing focus, basically, even on that side, right?
Yeah, you know, like what I was thinking is like when we are just doing iterations, like we bring everyone to a very myopic view. So, and then everyone is okay, what we do next 2 weeks, which is important, by the way. I'm not dismissing that by any means. The point that I'm trying to make is when we only have that, right? So we bring everyone to that myopic view, and so every planning is just the next 2 weeks and next 2 weeks. And then inevitably, and I believe that many people went through that, someone at some point, everyone think that everything is going well because every demo, every 2 weeks, everyone say, yeah, okay, no questions. Oh yeah, that's good. Oh, the color of that button here and there and stuff. And then all of a sudden, everyone thinks that it's been going very well, demo after demo, and then someone raised their hand, someone in the business said, look, we are not achieving what we want to achieve. We are not going fast enough. And then it's like, where did that come from? Because at some point, someone raised their head above the waterline and say, look, we've been doing this iteration after iteration for more than 6 months now, but I still don't have the product that I want. And then the crazy conversations start. So, okay, so you are saying that you don't have what we wanted, but we are giving you updates every 2 weeks. So you had your chance every 2 weeks to say what you wanted, but you now saying that you don't have what you want. But then because we've been in the situation on both sides now, right? Because we also have our internal stuff going on. And sometimes you're just, and then we look at us like, but where is that thing that we wanted to have 3 months ago? Oh, we've been iterating, but we didn't have that phase. So asking people to raise their head above the line of water is like, okay, we will iterate, but in 3 months' time, that's what we want to achieve. And then every demo, every 2 weeks, we not only see what was done, but we also check how far are we to achieve what we wanted to achieve now in 2.5 months, not in, because like it's 2 weeks past from the first iteration. So now we have 2.5 months to what we wanted to do. Now we only have 2 months, now a month and a half. So this allows us to always keep track of the business progression and properly calibrate the iterations. Because quite often teams will go just one iteration after another, just same mode, same mode, same mode. And there's no way to see if you are on track because there's no goal. You don't know if you're on track. You're just iterating.
It's like that. Sorry, it reminds me of Alice in Wonderland, no, and the Cheshire Cat. No, it's like, where should I go? No, it's like, if you don't know where you want to go, all paths
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
All paths will take you there.
Exactly. So it's a bit like that, no?
Yeah, Barbesi actually has a very good, I think, kind of final question, I guess, is that, so in the end, there'll always be misalignment on that. There will be, tech will do demos, but still business don't care in the end. So why not drop them? Now, I've got a problem with that because actually, it's not just the business's fault. In fact, I would argue that it's more tech's fault that the business don't care about the demos. And this goes back to the question of focus, goes back to creating a narrative towards that focus. So if you have a mission, demos at every iteration are a very important thing, because if you have a purpose or mission or an objective, like a 3-month objective or something, every demo should be signposting to how far you are towards getting there. And that should be the context in which you demonstrate the next bit of progress. And then you can come and ask us whether the business will not care. Business don't care because you're not giving them the information that that they need.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. And we are going to have an internal meeting at some point about how to do good demos, because this is something that we changed in one of our projects. We were very deliberate because we are planning, like creating those milestones and properly planning, stopping for a week, sometimes even like 2 weeks, to do all the planning, to create that overall scope, and then we start iterating. And what we started doing on those that project, we have a few streams in that project. Every demo, one of the first slides shows a picture of a diagram. Like each stream has a different diagram and stuff, but it has a picture of everything that needs to be done by the end of that phase. And then they are, like, for example, the things that are not done, they are all empty, right? So they are like just like in gray, let's say, and then we color code every demo and say, look, this is what was done before. This is what was done during the past 2 weeks, and this is what's still left. And we put a lot of numbers and say, like, look, this is what is missing, or blah, 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 that's the percentage. But we have a picture depicting what was done, what was not done, but always, the end goal is always in every demo. So we bring the focus of the stakeholders, not only to what was done, because as I was saying before, just bringing people to that myopic view is not always useful. So in the demo, you keep the big picture in place, and then we talk about what was done, and then we ask. So now, given what we've done and where we are, and looking at this picture, this is all that is left. Does this still make sense? Or we can raise our hand and say, look, it's not looking like we will be able to do everything. Can we reprioritize this? Can we have a conversation about the scope? Because either we need to increase time or recalibrate the scope. Or certain things, now that we know what we know, should we change some of that things? So, but the demos are not just showing progress. It's about creating the context to replan. So this is quite important.
So don't drop the demos.
Please don't. If someone is not interested in the meetings that we are arranging, just make sure that, like, are we providing them an important
with the information that they want in a format in which they can consume it as well, because that's
a good fire chat. What makes a good demo?
Yes. So there are quite a few questions, and we are running out of time. So let's try maybe to go through quickly some of the comments. What about cross domains that every project needs? I've seen projects struggle because of authorization, internationalization. OKRs would be useful here. So there are quite a few things in here, but I don't think that we're going to have time to go through the cross-cutting concerns. This is another very interesting topic. How do we distribute work across multiple teams? Right? How, not only the planning, but how is the distribution? How do you deal with, like Gerai was saying in the chat in here for the people watching, what about things like authorization, internationalization? And I assume that he's talking about cross-cutting concerns, infrastructure, and things like that. Javier Chacana is talking about OKRs. So OKRs is a funny one, because like we recently introduced OKR to our business, but there are talks already inside Codurance to introduce OKRs at the project level. So Javier, like, you can get in touch with us and I can point you in the right direction, because there are some experiments in that area, still in embryonic stages. But OKRs at the project level could be very interesting as well for development teams and things like that. Gerai mentioned any book recommendations. So we need to start wrapping up. So any book recommendations as always?
Yeah. Oh, plenty. So we talked about the Agile Samurai. On top of that, if you're interested as well, there's the Liftoff book by Diana Larsen, which I also think, covers a few of these things. You have the game storming book, which is all dynamics on brainstorming, ideation, and so on. You have the innovators innovation games, I think it's called, or something like that. Again, a set of exercises in order to help tailor product and innovate in general. What else?
Value stream mapping is an interesting one if people are struggling to understand one of the techniques of kind of getting the next mission or next focus. That's also could be helpful.
And there is a book that I read that I found quite interesting, although we've been talking about projects here, but it's a book that changed my perspective a bit. It's called No Projects. So basically, like, you can read the book because it's quite interesting. It's like the idea of a product should not start and end. A product is a continuum. You could still have the iterations in terms of planning phases or milestones and doing inceptions and stuff, but it's more of a continuum, because a project normally is associated to start and end, and the end sometimes justifies the means.
On the end justifies the means.
No, but like
that's for another fireside chat.
No, so this is what he says, which is interesting. Like when the company has a project mindset instead of a product mindset. A project normally you have a scope, and you try to achieve that scope with the least amount of effort possible, with the least money and stuff. Which, if the project ends and that's over, it's a good approach. But if you need to keep building on top, you should not be dropping certain things, and you should think about the lifelong the life of the product, and not just those small projects, because then you can compromise quality and stability and so on and so forth. But anyway, look for no projects.
One thing is there's a couple of papers. I remember the name of this thing. It's called the Punctuated Equilibrium Model of team development. And there's a couple of papers on that. The thing that I mentioned around, when do teams influence the way that they're working, so to speak, and what are the areas where over the
And there
internet.
are
So
there are
check it out.
yeah, and there are books like the Phoenix Project, which is an interesting book in terms of alignment of people and focus. There is the team topologies as well, about how to structure some of the teams and responsibilities. So there are a few other books.
Well, any closing thoughts, or are we leaving it here?
No, I think I said it all.
Yeah. Okay, so then thanks everyone for your time and for your contributions. It was really nice to see all the interaction in the chat. You were gonna say something, go for it.
Yeah, sorry, I just remembered now that you mentioned. I would like to say exactly that. I really would like to say thanks to Mohammed Marabez, Gerai, and quite a few others like Petros. So people that
Chema and yeah.
uh,
Mhm.
exactly. So Nikita. So there's quite a few of you that are always here, and you are really making those fireside chats far more enjoyable, because you are bringing a different perspective. You are giving us more things to talk about, answering those questions. So, like, special thank to all of you for the contributions and to make this far more enjoyable.
All right. And with that note, remember, if you're seeing this for the first time and you like what you saw, and you would like to be notified when we go live again, just hit the notification, subscribe, and leave comments, topics, and things that you would like us to discuss. And welcome to the community, I would say then. And thanks, everyone. See you on the next one.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.